Well, welcome all of you joining in with us today for this new series. Welcome to those of you at Madras and Northgate, those of you joining in online. You know, one of the great ironies of life is this tendency that all of us have to resist God. I mean, all of us have done it at some time or another. Some of you are doing it right now. It's that idea that we think, I need to say no to God. Now, when you think about it like that, and you hear yourself say that, no, God, it really doesn't make any sense. But all of us have done it. We have this tendency to want to resist God. And I think we do it for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons we do it is because we want to maintain control of our life. Now, we don't really control anything. Control is sort of a myth that we all live with, and I control how things go, but we all believe that, and so we resist God. I think another reason we resist God is because we think if we let him be in control of our life, he'll mess with our life. So that's why we wind up saying things like, God, I give my life to you except for this one area, this one habit, this one thing. I still need to control that. Or this one relationship, I need to be in control of that. Or God, my money, you can have everything but my money. So we resist God because we really believe that if I give God complete, total control of my life, then he's going to mess with my life and it won't be as good as it could be. And then there's another reason I think some of us resist God because we're just mad at him. You know, he didn't do what we wanted him to do. He should have done A, but he didn't. He could have healed her, but he didn't. He could have made him stay with me, but he didn't. And we don't know whether he caused the pain or he allowed the pain, and that whole question doesn't really matter when you're in the middle of pain. All we know is if he's God, he could have done something, and he didn't do anything, and we're just mad at him. So we resist him having control in our lives. Well, this series we're about to go in, leading up to Easter, we're going to talk about some people that had perspective on the life of Jesus. You know, everybody has a perspective that you see Jesus from a certain viewpoint, sort of a snapshot. We're going to look at some people surrounding the life, and particularly the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, that they had a perspective on him. And all of these people are people who are characters you might not have heard or focused on very much, and they're people that in their own way and for their own reason, they said no to God. And I think what we're going to see is that as we look at these characters and we learn about them a little bit, I think what we're going to see is that there's a little bit of them in all of us, that when you first listen to it and you hear their story, you're going to say, why would they do that? Why would they say no? Because, you know, in their moment, you're going to say they're on the wrong side of history. Everybody would have said yes, but because they have what you wish you had. You know, they actually got to see Jesus in body form. And you think if you saw Jesus, then of course you'd say yes, and you'd be one of the people that followed him. And they saw him, but in their own way and for their own reasons, they wound up resisting God having control in their life. And I think as we learn about their lives, what we're going to learn is that there's a lot of them in us that will see ourselves in our lives in their characters. Now, today, as we study this, what we're going to notice is that, I guess with all of these characters, is that their resistance of God, it wound up being futile because here they are and they're trying to resist God, and God's plan, God's wound up having his way anyway. And they wound up resisting, and even through their resistance, God had his way, showing that God is ultimately in control. Now today, to start this whole thing off, we're going to look at this guy who's like somebody that you know. In fact, it may be you, or maybe you're married to somebody like this, or maybe you work with somebody like this. This guy is like the ultimate politician. He's the guy that always lands on his feet. He's the ultimate negotiator. He's the power broker in the situation. He was able to work his way right up to the top and where he had ultimate power, and you dared not cross him. I mean, he's a guy that if you crossed him, something was going to happen. He got his way. He demanded his way. If you were to meet him in our culture, there'd be a little bit of something about him that many of us would admire him. A lot of people would admire him because he's so powerful and he's right so often, and he's a little bit intimidating, but he'd be the kind of guy that everybody'd sort of want to know. His name is Caiaphas, and he's the most powerful Jewish person in Israel in the day of Jesus, because he's the high priest. And what that means is that once a year, he got to go into the Holy of Holies in the temple, and he represented the whole people of God before God. He got to have their sins removed. He was the person that represented God. So in a physical form, he was closer to God physically than any other person at that time. In addition to that, he was like a local kind of civic leader because he was the leader of the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin was the court of their land, sort of the high court, the supreme court of their land. It made laws for the Jewish people. He was also powerful because he'd been put in place by the Roman government, and so he represented the Jewish people before the emperor in Rome. He was the go-between between the Roman government and the Jewish people, and he had lots of power. He had tax-free living, the kind of thing that lots of us would like to have. In fact, this guy Caiaphas, unlike most high priests in his day, and he's one of the last few, he stayed in power longer than anyone else. The average high priest stayed in power 3 to 5 years. Caiaphas, through his negotiation, through his power broking, he stays in power for 18 years. He not only got power, through his ability, he was able to maintain power. Now, 15 years into his reign as high priest, Jesus begins to come and on the scene in Israel. And at the moment Jesus comes on the scene, Jesus begins to draw following. I mean, he's going around teaching like nobody's ever heard. He's healing people. And one of the things that he did is that every time he'd heal somebody, you read this if you're reading through the Gospels in your plan, your place, your time. If you're reading through the Gospels, you see that when Jesus heals somebody, he tells them to go and show themselves to the high priest. Now, a part of the reason that he did that is because that was the law. The priest was supposed to be the one to verify that this miracle had taken place and that it was from God. So here's Caiaphas, and Jesus is regularly out teaching, and over time, he's sending more and more people who couldn't hear, more people who couldn't see, people who had all kinds of afflictions. They're being healed. They're coming to Caiaphas and his group of priests, and they're reporting all that God has done for them through Jesus. So just imagine, over time, Caiaphas and his cohort are reminded, hey, there's a guy out there, and he's not teaching about God exactly the way you would, and people are beginning to follow him, and more and more people are coming to him, you're reminding him how popular he is, and he continues to do miracles, and he continues to send them to you for confirmation. Now, another part of their job that you just need to know about is that a part of the job of the priests they were supposed to understand the prophecies about the Messiah so well that when the Messiah finally did show up, they'd be able to be the ones that point to him for the people and say, there he is. That's why when you're reading through the Gospels, you read about a guy named John the Baptist, and when John's on the scene, everybody's wondering if he's it or not, and the priest actually go out and go, are you the Messiah? Because everybody's wondering, we're sort of the ones that are supposed to verify that. And so they're seeing Jesus, people are wondering if he's it, and they're supposed to be verifying whether he's it or not. And as time went on, their motives become more and more transparent as Jesus' popularity grows. Early in their interactions, when you read about it with Jesus, what they're saying to Jesus is, hey, you're not teaching right. And, hey, that's not the way we've always understood it. And, hey, that's not exactly the way you should be representing God. And they did everything they could to quiet him. They did everything they could to get him off track. They did everything that they could to bring down his popularity in the eyes of the people. But finally, Jesus does a miracle that is so astounding and so is such a mind blower that the people can't deny it and the priests can't deny it, and at that moment their motives become crystal clear. And what we see is their problem isn't Jesus' teachings about God, and their problem isn't even really that the people are beginning to follow him. Their problem is that they're afraid they're going to lose power with Rome, and they're going to lose their position with Rome. If he continues to do what he's been doing, if Jesus continues to go the way that he's going to go, then people are going to follow him, and Rome is going to get upset, and they're going to kick us out of power. So they do what anybody does when you've worked so hard to build your position of power and you can feel what you've worked on begin to erode and you wonder what you're doing is wrong and you've got to do something, they leverage their influence and their power and their ability to get things back into their control the way they want them to be. So now, let me show you how this actually takes place and where their motives become clear. This is in the Gospel of John, which is a book in the New Testament. John's one of the guys who writes about Jesus' life. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And Matthew and John are eyewitnesses. Mark and Luke are people who wrote about the testimony of eyewitnesses. But John's one of the closest followers of Jesus, and he writes about Jesus' life. And what we're going to read about today is the context for this, before I read it to you, is Jesus has just done this unbelievable miracle. Jesus has gone, and he has raised from the dead a man who's been dead and buried long enough that his body has begun to decay and stink. We're told that he's been dead and buried for 4 days. They got no embalming. The guy's already smelling. He goes to the grave, and this guy's a prominent guy in a place really close to Jerusalem. And Jesus had normally been teaching and doing miracles, and he'd actually even raised a few people, but they had not been dead very long. He raises this guy, Lazarus, and he's a prominent guy. We think he's a wealthy guy, but the key thing is he lives in close proximity to Jerusalem, where the priest and all of their following are very close. Jesus goes and he raises him from the dead, and what Jesus does is publicly, in front of all these mourners who are still around comforting Lazarus' family, in front of all of them, he goes to the tomb of this guy that's been buried for 4 days. He calls him out of the tomb, and the guy steps out of the tomb alive. And at that moment, when Lazarus steps out of the grave alive, even some of the people who'd been skeptical about Jesus begin to believe. I mean, even the skeptics were like, I understand what the priests are saying. He does teach things that are not exactly the way I've always thought they were, and I don't care what the priests say about where he comes from, because that's one of the things the priest said. He doesn't come from the right place for the prophecies. And I don't really care about any of that. I'm telling you, when a guy can call a dead man out of the grave, I don't care what he teaches. I don't have to understand it. I'm with him. In fact, that's always been my testimony. Some of you have heard me say that before, is if a man can predict his own death, which Jesus did, if he dies and then 3 days later he can pull off his own resurrection, which he did, then I'm with him. I don't care what he teaches. I don't have to understand it. I don't even care what he demands of me. If he can pull off a resurrection from the dead, then I'm with him. Well, that's where the skeptics are. And word begins to spread about Lazarus' unbelievable resurrection and that he's been brought back to life by Jesus. In fact, let me just read this to you from John chapter 11. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary, now this is Lazarus' sister Mary, not Mary the mother of Jesus, Mary. They'd come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did, and they put their faith in him. So a lot of people who had been skeptical, who had been listening to the priest and said, yeah, we get what they're saying and we don't disagree with them, when they see Lazarus walk out of the grave alive, that's it. That's enough. They don't have to see anything else. But other people, they go back and they tell the Pharisees. In fact, verse 46, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Guys, I got bad news. He raised a guy from the dead that was already smelling. He was already decaying, and he brought him back to life. So the Pharisees do what people like to do when there's trouble. They called a meeting. Then the chief priest and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. I mean, this is getting out of control, guys. Let's all get together. And look what they say. What are we accomplishing, they asked. In other words, look, we're not getting anywhere with this, guys. It's been 3 years, and we leveraged our power, we leveraged our influence with the people, and we cannot shut it down. What are we accomplishing? I mean, we've asked him the hardest questions we know how to ask. We even tried to fool him into getting against Rome by talking to him about taxes, and he made us look stupid in front of all the people. We are not getting anywhere, and we've done everything we can do. What are we going to do now? Now, when you hear them say that, you're like, come on, what's the big deal? I mean, the guy's just going around teaching people to love God and love people, and he's helping people. He's healing the sick. He raised a guy from the dead. Why don't you just get on board with him? In fact, if you were in the meeting, you're thinking to yourself, hey, I've got an idea in the meeting. I vote that we adjourn and all follow Jesus. That's what I vote. I mean, that's what you think. You can't understand why they're doing what they do. But the truth is, they do what anybody does when they feel their power beginning to slip away. I mean, there's something going on in them, and I tell you what's going on in them is in me, and it's in a lot of you. And that is when things begin to get a little shaky and things begin to erode, and the outcomes that you want out of your life or out of the thing you're leading or your family aren't going the way you want. You do whatever you need to do to get back in control. They go, instead of just jumping on board and going with Jesus, they go into damage control. I mean, what can we do to get back into control? What can we do with our power slipping away? I mean, what else would you want them to do? They wind up considering things. I believe they wind up considering things in this meeting that years before they would never have considered. But what other choice do they do? They've done everything they know to do, and their power is slipping away. They got to control the outcome of their life, so what else are they going to do? And then they expose their real agenda. What are we accomplishing, they ask. Here is this man performing many miraculous signs. Hello, clue phone, it's for you. Maybe you should just follow him. Here's Jesus doing all of this stuff. And then notice this deluded statement they make. If we let him go on like this. Now just stop for a second. Had they been letting him go on? Had Jesus been doing the miracles he'd been doing? Did Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead because they gave him the power to raise Jesus from the dead? They say this like, look, we've been allowing this to go on. See, here's a group of people that because of their power, because of their years of power, and because of their wealth, and because of their position, they have become to believe that they control the outcomes. They become to believe that they control this, and that the only reason Jesus is doing what he's doing is because they've allowed it to happen. He couldn't have done what he'd done, raise this man from the dead, unless they had allowed it to happen, if they hadn't stopped him. But let's be clear, they could stop him. I mean, we can stop him. We've only allowed this. We could stop him if we wanted to. It's in our control to shut him down if that's what we decide to do. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. Yes. I mean, that's what God is after, that everyone would believe in him. But what if everyone believing in Jesus and everybody following Jesus leads to you losing control of the things you want to control, your little kingdom? See, here's where this whole thing intersects with your life and my life. At some point in your life, I think more than at one point in your life, maybe at more than one point, for me it's been more than one point, at least once in your life, there will become one big time where following Jesus will cost you something. Where you will have to decide, am I going to follow Jesus? See, something will come along in your world, and whatever it is, you'll have this choice between, do I do what I know is right, or do I sort of sacrifice what I know God would have me to do to maintain control of what I have in my life? I can sense that my job, that my family, that my world is getting a little shaky, and for me to be able to go where I want to, I might have to do something that God doesn't want me to do, and you'll be faced with a choice. Will I do what God wants me to do, or will I try to control the outcome of what's going on in my life? See, when I follow Jesus, or will I abandon my morality? Will I abandon my values in order to take control, in order to maintain what I believe I've got to maintain? Somewhere along the line, as things begin to slip away from you, maybe it's your health, maybe it's your marriage, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your job, maybe it's relationships that you think you control, it's your business, it's your retirement, it's your control of your life that you want. It begins to slip away, and you're left with this dilemma. Do I continue to follow Jesus even though following Jesus may cost me more than I'm willing to pay? Will I continue to follow Jesus, or will I take control of my life and try to maintain the outcomes that I want in life? I mean, look at the rest of this. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our temple and our nation. Now that's what they feared most. I mean, it wasn't really that Jesus had bad theology. It wasn't really that people liked him and began to follow this other rabbi. It wasn't that he was leading people away. It was that they were losing their place with the Romans. In other words, we have to stop Jesus, because if he continues to do this, the Romans are going to get distracted by this, and they're going to take away our temple and our people and our nation, and we're going to lose it all. So for the sake of what we have with Rome, we have to shut this down. While they're all there wondering about this, the guy we're talking about today steps center stage, Caiaphas. Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. Do you not understand, guys? I mean, have you forgotten who I am? Do you not remember how I've leveraged my power, how we got here? I've been doing this for 15 years. Have you forgotten who I am? You know nothing at all. And then he says it. He says this thing. He just says, you do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish? And I think at that moment, a hush fell over that room. One of those quiets that's so quiet, you can hear a pin drop. I mean, you can't imagine the drama of this moment. Now, we know that some of the men who sitting in that room right then, after the resurrection of Jesus, they become followers of Jesus. And I think that's the only way that John even knows about this statement that Caiaphas makes. I think they tell him about it later after they're following Jesus. The drama of this, it's high drama. They're thinking, whoa, Caiaphas, whoa, oh, slow down. Die. You're willing for him to die? Caiaphas, you're willing to take a man's life? I mean, we want to stop him, but we're still men of God. You're willing to kill an innocent man to maintain what you have with Rome? Die. Are you really willing for him to die, Caiaphas? Now, we don't have a record of this. This isn't in the Bible. But I imagine Caiaphas saying to them, yeah, aren't you? I mean, we're going to lose everything we have. It's better for one guy to die than us lose the temple and the whole nation. Wouldn't you rather he die? Come on, guys. Of course I'm willing for him to die. What other choice? We've tried everything else. What else do you want me to do? Now, we don't know that he said any of that. But we do know what they decided to do. The Bible says, so from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Eventually, they have him arrested. They trump up some charges. John tells us that they pay off witnesses, that they pay people to testify against Jesus falsely. Eventually, they take him to the Roman governor because they don't have legal power to execute anybody. And they convince the Roman governor that Jesus is leading an insurrection against the government of Rome. That's where the title King of the Jews came from. Jesus didn't say that. They said that he's going to lead an insurrection and overtake Rome. And they have him killed. Now you hear that and you think, wow, these are evil guys. I mean, say what you want to, Ed, about men of God. These are evil men. These guys are evil right to the core. But here's the principle, and here's where it touches on all of our lives. When you begin to believe, when I begin to believe that everything I have is because of me, when I begin to believe that I am who I am and I have what I have and it's primarily because of me, then when I begin to lose it, I have no one else to depend on but me. See, when I begin to think, when you begin to believe that everything I have, that whether it's my family or my children or my blessings, or when I look at my business or I look at the things I lead or I look at who I am, when I look at it and I say, all of that came about because of my hard work, because of my smarts, because of me. Everything I have is because of me. Then when it begins to slip away, what other choice do you have but to depend on you? If you did it, then it's on you. Let me just say it another way. If all you have is a result of your hard work, then the only way to maintain what you have is through your hard work. If it's all because of you, then when it's threatened, it depends on you. Now, most of us wouldn't say it that way. I mean, because we're grateful, and the only reason we'd be grateful is because we think somebody else had something to do with it. And we're humble, and we believe in God. And most of us, because look where we are, we're religious. And, you know, we even sing songs of thanks to God, so we wouldn't say it that way. But let's be honest. At times I begin to think, this is about me. This is about me. This is on me. And I've got to do something. And so if everything in my life, if my attitude in life is I am what I am because of me, then I live every day with the pressure of, then it's on me to keep this, to control this, to maintain this. And then when life happens, when you hit a bump, when somebody else goes off track and they begin to push back against you, well, then you get to secure and things begin to roll in your life. And the natural decision you have to make when you feel the foundation of your life eroding, if it's all dependent on you, is then I have to do whatever I have to do to maintain what I have. That's why I've watched. That's why we've seen men and women who spent years and years and years building a company, building a reputation, becoming a person who has high value and high integrity. In a moment when things begin to crumble, we watch them make decisions that while they're making them, we're going, oh my goodness, you're going against the values you said you believed in. You're paying too high a cost. Why are you even going that way? But I mean, what else could they do? I mean, if they got it, if it was on them, if it was their hard work and their smarts, then what else could they do but do something to get it back? You know how this plays out in relationships? I've watched women who do whatever they can, do whatever they need to do whatever they can to manipulate a guy until they get the guy. They get the guy. And they're so thrilled to have the guy. And they worked so hard and they did whatever they needed to do. And then once they have the guy and things begin to get a little shaky in the relationship, then what other choice do they have but to do whatever they need to do to keep the guy? Sacrifice whatever they need to sacrifice. Do whatever he says to do whatever the guy wants to keep the guy. Because I got the guy, it's dependent on me. I mean, from where I sit, I've watched men and women wrench themselves and their values to the point that they're embarrassed themselves and do things because if they got it, they got to maintain it. I've watched high school and college students become something for somebody else, become something they hated in themselves. I've watched young men and women who felt they had the call of God on their life, but then because they had a relationship and the person they were with, because they wouldn't make enough money or because they weren't getting somewhere fast enough, they abandoned the call that they felt God had on their life and they did something else for the sake of this person. They sacrificed it. And of course, once you sacrifice it, you have to do whatever you can to sacrifice to keep it. And you become less than because if it's all on you, then of course you have to do whatever you can to maintain it. I've watched parents who are so convinced that their kids are going to make it, and they push and they prod and they control and they push and they prod, and then when their kid gets a little off track, what other choice do they have but to push and to prod and control to get the kid back on track because they are going to make sure that their kid makes it. See, you know what happens when you go that way? Inevitably, when you go that way, that you're going to do whatever you can, you're going to work hard, you're going to make it happen because you can make it happen. Inevitably, you wind up at odds with God when you need God most. And in the end of your story is like the story of these people we're going to look at for the next few weeks. At the end of the deal, at the end of the job, at the end of the relationship, at the end of the marriage, at the end of the point when the kid goes and does what the kids are going to do anyway, at the end of it when all of it's blown up anyway, you just underscore the fact you don't control outcomes. It's not your job to control outcomes. You just underscore the fact that God is in control. And you either live with the knowledge of the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. You either live with open hands and say, God, not my will, but yours be done, and I'm scared to death, but I'm going to live with my hands open, and God, I think it's all a blessing from you, so I'm going to count it as a blessing. God, you either live that way with your hands open and trust that God is in control and God will leave you, and of course you have to follow him. But your job is to be obedient, and God's job is to be in charge of the outcomes of your life. There's so many negative examples that I could give to you this. I mean, I hear people say all the time, I think my business is a blessing from God. I think my marriage, I think she's a blessing from God. I think this relationship's a blessing from God. I think my children are a blessing from God. I think my life is such a blessing from God. Well, if that's true, then why are you threatened when something gets shaky? If God blessed you with it, won't God continue to bless you in life? Your job is just to be obedient. There's so many good examples of this in our church, men and women who've said, well, you know what? I may very well lose my job, but I will not lose who I am with God. If that happens, then it happens. If she leaves me because of this, then I guess she leaves me. I won't let her get between me and God. I don't want it that way, and my heart will be broken if it happens that way. But I will be obedient to God. There's a man in our church, and I admire him so much, and I wanted to tell his story, and he didn't want me to tell you his name. But a number of years ago, he was about to lose his business. He had gotten in partnership with a guy, and the other guy, when things got a little off track, he did some unethical things, and they got to a point where all the unethical stuff was coming out because they were partners. They were both tied together, and it looked like they were going to lose the business, and in fact, there's a chance that if things didn't go the right way, they might actually go to jail. And I watched this guy, and he's such a high-integrity follower of Christ, and he just kept on loving his family. He kept on giving time to people. He kept on serving in the church. He kept on donating money. He kept on being all the things that he knew he should be, and I just was amazed at where it was going to go. But I knew he was under tremendous amounts of stress. Who wouldn't be with everything that was going on of what he would lose in his business and where it would go, and the fact that who knows, he might even go to jail. So on the day before, when it was going to all settle down, on the day when they were going to go to court, and maybe he'd be able to get his partner, buy his partner out, and he'd be able to settle the things with the creditors and get all the ethical part, and even the authorities would let it go if he settled it all. On the day that they were going to go figure all of that out, the day before that, I called him and I just said, hey, how you doing? And he said, man, I'm doing great. I said, no, come on, really? How are you doing? He said, really, I'm doing fine. I was just sitting here, and then he said his wife's name, and we were just talking. And I said to her, I said, you know, if we win tomorrow and it all goes the way we want to go, and we get the business back and we buy them out and nobody has to go to jail, then we win. If it doesn't go the way we want, then we win, because my job is just to be obedient to God through this and trust that God will take care of the outcomes that he wants from my life. So I'm just trusting him, Ed, and I'm really doing okay, because if I win tomorrow, I win. If I lose tomorrow, I win. I'll just still be obedient to God. I'm sitting on the other end of the phone, and I'm going, well, of course. That's why you're calm. I mean, if I just believed that, if I could believe what you believe, if I could hang on to that and the things that are shaking my life, I'd be calm in my life too. I mean, wouldn't you be? Wouldn't you be calm if you just lived your life that way? Imagine if you took that into every arena of your life. The next time the deal's going down and you got to make the deal and somebody's pushing you, got to do this thing to make the deal. Imagine if you could just say, hey, you know, I'm not going to do that thing you want me to do, and if we get the deal, that'll be great, but if we don't get the deal, that'll be great, because I'm just going to be obedient to God and trust that he takes care of the outcomes of my life. Imagine in that area, you know, some of you have an area with your spouse, there's that thing that you know you ought to talk about, but you know it'll be uncomfortable, and you don't know if you don't want to talk about it because you don't know what you will handle if they don't do what you want them to do, and you want to control it, so you just don't talk about it. Imagine if you went into that thing and you just said, hey, I know I need to talk to you about this, and I don't know what you're going to do, and if you go the way we want to, then I win. And if it doesn't go the way I want to, I win because I know I have been obedient to God and I'm trusting Him to be in charge of the outcomes of my life. What if you just went into every area of your life and you said every morning, my goal with God is just to say, if I win, I win. If I lose, I win. Because my job is not to determine whether I win or lose. My job is just to be obedient to you, God, and trust that you will take care of the outcomes and bless my life. I'm not responsible for outcomes. I'm responsible for my obedience to you. Do you want to know the real irony of this story that I told you about Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin historically? Here's the irony of this story historically. Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin do everything they can. They even kill an innocent man to try to maintain control before Rome. And in just a few years, Rome comes in anyway. And Rome destroys the temple and destroys Jerusalem to the point that it won't be until the 1940s that they come back into Jerusalem as a people. And they still haven't had control of the temple to this day. Rome destroys that temple and they lose the temple and they lose the nation. And the only reason we even know Caiaphas is because his name becomes a footnote of somebody who tried to thwart the will of God in this world. Resistance to God is futile. We are not in control of the outcomes. We are in control of whether we're obedient or not. You did not make who you are. God is blessing your life. God is giving you this day. God is giving you this moment. Since you did not make you who you are not responsible for maintaining who you are. Our responsibility is to be obedient before God and to allow God to control the outcomes of our life. So here's the question. What's the area of your life where you're tempted right now, or you are already sacrificing, doing what you know is right for the sake of trying to maintain and control some outcome? Where are you so afraid of losing something and you're thinking, if I don't, it won't. If I don't, she won't. If I don't, he won't. Don't you understand that when you're saying that, you're saying, God, this problem that I'm concerned about, that I'm sacrificing for, it's too big for you. I know, God, I know you made the sun, moon, and stars. I know you made 600 different kinds of beetles. I know you made every snowflake unique, and all of that you can handle. But this one thing in my life is too big for you. So, God, I'm going to have to take care of it, because if I don't, it won't. Our responsibility is to wake up every day and say, I'm just going to be obedient. I'm going to be obedient to God, and I'm going to trust Him with the outcome of my life. I will not be at odds with God over things I can't control anyway. Let's bow together and pray. And now, Father in heaven, we thank you that you are good all the time. You never change. You are good. Your heart is toward us. Your eyes are toward us. You want the best for us. And Father, you have blessed all of us again today with another day of life, with the blessings of life. And yet there are things in our life that we feel like we have to control, that we have to do. I pray that today you'll help us to be in our right mind and to say to you, God, I'm just going to be obedient and trust that you'll take care of the outcomes of my life. Father, thank you for your love for us. Thank you for Jesus. In his name I pray. Amen.